What is going on, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Busy Bariatric Podcast. Today, we are going to be talking all things blood sugar with one of my favorite people in the bariatric community, Kayla Girgen. Kayla, why don't you do me the service of telling everyone who you are, because you'll do it 100 times better than I am.
Yeah, I don't know about that. I'll try to do my short version, though, versus, how I...
It's okay. We're unscripted, so you go as long as you want, and this is just kind of how we do it.
Yeah. Well, I always love talking to you because I feel like we have so many similar interests. And I think, looking back, what initially got me into nutrition was, I was fascinated by things like bodybuilding and just all of, that whole world. And then eventually went to school to be a registered dietitian. And one of my actually very first rotations was in a bariatric surgery unit. I have always worked in weight management and just really enjoyed the kind of the play on psychology and physiology piece. And then I think that really hits home when you're working with folks after bariatric surgery, because now you have all these anatomy changes and trying to navigate all that. And working in a bariatric surgery clinic, I really saw firsthand just the shortcomings, I think, of a lot of that post-op support and why folks like you and me do what we do, because there's just not a whole lot of direction sometimes. So I think maybe that first 6 months, everything is mapped out pretty clearly. And then after that, it's like, oh my gosh, now what do I do?
Yeah, it's definitely one of the fun parts of when we talk, because it's just nice to meet registered dietitians who get it, but also understand the importance of resistance training and building muscle after weight loss surgery. So I always joke, I go giddy whenever a registered dietitian is like, oh yeah, you should absolutely be resistance training. And it's weird because I feel like I see a lot of registered dietitians and a lot of surgical programs almost shy away from resistance training after weight loss surgery. Have you noticed that in your professional career, or is that just something I keep picking up like nails on a chalkboard?
That's a good question. I guess I never really connected the two. I would say I do see it maybe in just weight loss in general, because I think even in working with a lot of the women I work with, it's like once you start to pick weights up, then the scale goes the other way. So I think there's that psychology behind it too, but we don't always talk about body composition changes. And I think it's one thing to lose weight versus lose fat. So it's okay, are we losing muscle and water, or are we actually losing what we want to and do things like tone up and all of that. So I think those are some important distinctions too.
Yeah, I think it's really a very important part of looking at body comp, getting everything together, and kind of figuring out what is your lifestyle going to look like after bariatric surgery. And some of the cool things that we've always discussed is kind of this idea of how do you make a sustainable program for a client, and how do you incorporate movement in the way that you want. I always think it's cool because your account, as much as you do nutrition, I feel like you are one of the more active registered dietitians. How do you really kind of incorporate that for your clients, of the importance of movement, activity, and everything after weight loss?
Yeah, I think it's finding something you enjoy. And I think you and I are no strangers to having those personal struggles too. It's just because I'm a dietitian doesn't make it easy to move. It's if anything, you feel more pressure, right? You got to walk the walk and, practice what you preach. And I think it's finding something you enjoy. I found rucking, and that was a really big, game changer for me, because I was like, okay, well, I can walk with weight on, get double down on my steps and get more benefit. So plus it gets you outside. So I think really finding those things that you enjoy, but ultimately it's those things that, bring that joy in, because then you're going to stick to them. So especially with movement, I feel like it's always a vulnerable habit.
And I think for those who don't know what rucking is, can you just give a quick 30-second explanation? Because I kind of want to dig into this, and then I promise we'll eventually get to blood sugar at some point today.
That's right. We're talking about blood sugar today.
We are talking about blood sugar, but this is why I just like having people on, is I just like talking to them. And we're going to score on 8 different ways, so it'll be fun.
Yes. So rucking is just walking with weight. So it has some military origins. It's how, a lot of soldiers, ruck is a noun and it's a verb. So it's something you carry like a backpack, or it's something you do. You can go for a ruck. But basically when you walk with weight, and why I specifically like this for folks after bariatric surgery is one, say you've lost 80, 90, 100 plus pounds, and then you you throw 10 pounds on your back and you're like, oh my gosh, how did I walk around with 10 times this all the time? And it's also great for you get a better calorie burn if you love to walk but feel like it's not enough, and especially bone density. So we tend to see like as you lose weight, you have less, work on your frame. You're not carrying around as much weight. So a lot of times we see bone density decrease after surgery. Rucking can help counter that just because you have more of that stimulus too with the added weight bearing exercise. So
I
you
didn't
really
real
get the best of both worlds. You get strength and you get endurance with it.
I didn't realize that with the bone density. And it's something that like I know I beat my clients over the head with on everything is the importance of resistance training because of bone density. As we get older, that plays such a big role. Why is bone density, especially for bariatric patients, so important?
Yeah, I think like looking at a lot of the underlying reasons for surgery, it's like, to improve health, to live longer. And when you look at things like bone density, for example, I can't remember the exact statistic, but you always hear like how, we think about frailty with age and like hip fractures. And I want to say it's like anyone after the age of 70, if they get a hip fracture, like your chance of dying within a year after that hip fracture is like 50% or something crazy. So I think that just the longevity component of it, because you think of how far back an injury sets you back, especially with old age. So bone density, I think it's not real sexy to talk about, but it's something that can be, a game changer and just really set you up long term.
I think it's cool because when we talk about bone density, like someone who comes to mind is Jim Stepani, who is really big in the muscle building frame. And I know you're nodding feverishly like I am. Like I'm a huge Jim Stepani fan because one, the vowel at the end of his name means I'm kind of biased, but he's very science backed. And it was interesting on a previous podcast I was listening to him about. He was talking about the importance, especially like after 40, and especially him now that he's in his 50s, really focusing on maybe less compound lifts, a little bit more of a whole body approach to lifting, but more importantly, adding things like mobility in, just because as we get older, the ability to like get under our bed and grab a shoe that's under there is a little bit more important than deadlifting 300 pounds. And so much of that comes from bone density and everything else. We've gone through all this though. The big thing we're going to talk about though is blood sugar. I'm going to reel this back in somehow. What role does blood sugar play after bariatric surgery? Because I feel like we're always focusing on protein, fiber, carbs. Like it seems like another thing to juggle. Why should blood sugar be more to the front of that line?
Yeah, I think really looking at again the biology of it, your anatomy changes after surgery, and one complication actually can be bigger fluctuations in blood sugar. So if you've heard of things like reactive hypoglycemia, that is one kind of consequence of surgery for a lot of people. So if you feel like hot or sweaty, like you're going to pass out like after eating, usually this can happen like up to 2 to 3 hours after eating. So you might not have like that initial feedback, but if you're feeling really lousy, oftentimes it does come down to blood sugar. But I think to progress in the long term, when you're eating in a way that stabilizes your blood sugar, your appetite's a lot more stable. You have more energy to do things like workout. You sleep better. A lot of people experience like less acne, better skin. For women, it can just help with hormones, especially around like perimenopause as well. So it can mitigate some of those like symptoms like hot flashes, for example. So I think there's a lot of underlying reasons that really help propel your progress. It's not like balancing your blood sugar has a direct impact maybe on your weight. In some ways, yes, because it can help, manage inflammation, but I think it makes your job so much easier to lose and then maintain in the long term.
So with perimenopausal, I think a lot of my clients are getting near, approaching, or fully into there. How would you recommend someone going about figuring out how to incorporate their blood sugar with bariatric surgery? Or, like, other than the hot flashes, what are some other telltale signs and how do we address them?
Yes, mood swings is a big one. So I think a lot of times mood swings, sleep is another one. So we see like a lot of sleep disturbances. And I think the impact of sleep on weight loss and blood sugar is crazy. I just shared, I think a little bit ago about how you change nothing about the way you eat, but you get one night of bad sleep and that can just trash your blood sugar levels. You're a lot, spiky for lack of a better term. So a lot more highs and lows, and you just don't process foods as efficiently. So I think if you can really kind of hone in on sleep. I had one client tell me, she's like, once I started planning everything around my sleep, it was a game changer. She's like, I could actually, I wasn't snacking constantly because when we're tired, it's not like we want protein and vegetables when you're underslept. It's like you want all the carbs.
I've never been sleep deprived and been like, you know what? I need like 172 grams of chicken breast, and could you put it over a bed of lettuce? It's never
Yes,
the first option
exactly.
we get. But it's important, and I want to go to like sleep as well, because I think for not just perimenopausal, but bariatric and so many other things, it's another one of those like unsexy things that we don't talk enough about. And the statistics, not just for blood sugar, but with the spikes and decreases in ghrelin and leptin, respectively, or vice versa. I know I always get those mixed up, but it does play so many big roles with it. And I think one of the mistakes that people see when they look at accounts is they see these people like, like you have to be in dawn patrol. And I'll be the first to admit, like I have my own cult following of people who are up early with me lifting, and they're like, well, what does your evening look like? That never gets asked, but it's like I'm usually shutting the laptop at 9. I read to my youngest daughter from 9 to 9:30, then I'm out cold. What are some nighttime routines that you suggest that clients can kind of really start to work on to help regulate their blood sugar?
Yeah, I love the kind of winding down, like whatever that routine looks like. I don't think there's any sort of like perfect evening routine, but I think like dimming the lights can certainly help. Screen time, like really being mindful about that. I think personally, I love to just like read instead. So kind of replacing the screen with a book can make a big difference. And I would say another thing that I like to do is even have like calm magnesium. So it's like a powdered magnesium drink. And I can actually see, so when I'm wearing like a glucose monitor, that monitors my blood sugar, I can actually like tell right when I have that drink. I can see a dip, and it's probably, a correlation between the magnesium on blood sugar levels, but then it does help reduce stress and help with sleep too. So
It's definitely something I've incorporated after talking to you is the magnesium calm that you can get pretty much at Costco. So it combines all my favorite things: sleep, Costco, talking to you.
mhm.
It's a good three punch right
Yes,
there.
sore muscles, it's great for too. So if you are feeling like a little sore,
It's definitely, I don't know, like I've turned 40 and I feel like the more I focus on sleep and recovery, it plays a bigger role than trying to get an extra lift, trying to even get my macros together. It's like I can have a perfect day of macro eating, and if I haven't gotten the right sleep or rested my body properly, it's like I'm almost 100 times worse than any other fat.
for sure. And then you're moody, you're mad about it, and
Yes.
so I think physically and mentally, it makes a big, big difference.
Yeah. So when you're looking at all this, obviously we're not bariatric patients in a vacuum, and obviously we can't, like spend our entire day like monitoring every single thing. And I teach my clients that as well with protein, carbs, fats, and all that good stuff. What are some like simple ways or things we can incorporate into our regular diet or lifestyle to make sure that we're kind of managing our blood sugar without making it like take up that much mental capacity in our heads?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say one thing that I always teach my clients is to cushion their carbs. So just like not having carbs by themselves can make a big difference. So carbs tend to be that one kind of macro that really impacts your blood sugar the most. That doesn't make them a bad thing, but it's just pairing them up with some sort of protein or a healthy fat, or making sure you get good amounts of fiber can really help. I will say too, even just like a short walk after meals. So I don't know. Recently, I feel like I saw this thing go around like walking as an exercise, and whoever started that movement, I just want to throat punch him. I don't know. It's like
So
walking is such a great exercise, and if you're leveraging that, especially after meals, you can really benefit your blood sugar levels that way too.
it's interesting because Dr. Gabrielle Lyons started that, and I've actually heard so many research counterpoints and everything else. And going through the entire quote and everything, she says, like, although it's not full exercise, it is actually a form of movement that if you consistently apply, it gets like one of those where it gets into the weeds of everything. And I think for a lot of bariatric patients, especially those who go on social media, and I think everyone in their health and fitness, when they go on social media, we get stuck almost majoring in the minors. Like we're so busy to go to like a cold plunge or a sauna, and it's like if you just like kind of eat some proteins with your pasta and then go for a walk after, you'll probably do better than trying to like jump into a cold plunge for 5 minutes and spend $700 on like some sort of, not needle in a bad way, but like, whatever the next big thing that comes out is.
Mm-hmm.
What are some
Right.
of the like things that people almost like major in the minors in when it comes to blood sugar?
That's a good question. I think there's some like maybe non-traditional hacks out there, like having vinegar before meals or something, or like a high carbohydrate meal specifically. So there's like tricks like that you can do, but I think you really can do more maybe with like how you pair things together, or even the order in which you eat your foods. So now I see like these blood sugar supplements going around and I'm like, yeah, like you said, it's let's do something else you're going to get a better return on your investment versus opting for this blood sugar friendly supplement.
The supplement industry is absolutely wild with that. So just so we're all on the same page, should we do carb then protein, protein then carb? Like, what is the list that you would tell a client to kind of start and finish with in their meal?
Yeah, and I do it a little bit different for bariatric folks just because volume becomes an issue. So a lot of
Mhm.
times it's protein, veggie, carbs for last, whatever
Yes.
room. I know, and when it makes sense. So if you have like a mixed dish, like we're getting into like soup season or stews, and I mean, don't sit there and pick things out. Like if it makes sense, it makes sense. Like if you have like your, bodybuilder diet, right? Like chicken, broccoli, rice, something like that versus rice first. And that can make a huge difference. It's like almost 50% just by changing the order in which you eat.
So then I got so tied up on that. So, like, for bariatric patients, we want to go protein, vegetable, carb for that. But, like, for an average lay person, it's better to go like carb, vegetable, protein.
Actually, it would be like probably veggie first. So like
Got
veggie protein. But again, like with volume, I usually switch those two around just so we're getting like protein in first. And then for here are my air quotes for anyone listening. So for
It'll go to
normal
YouTube
people,
as well,
yeah.
so we can see it. Us normal people. And I'm not a
Yeah.
normal person, I'm a bariatric person. But
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm actually just not normal, like, as a human being from when people talk to me. The bariatric surgery is just an extra tweak on it. But no, I think a lot of the times it's just simple things of like how you put your meals together can play such a big role. And I think it is one of those that we're getting into like soup and chili season, and I always get like, well, how do you track chili? It's like, well, you just make the big recipe. Most apps will let you like put the recipe in and then measure it out in grams, and it's like, I don't really sit there and think like, did I have more meat than bean in my chili? It's like I had 200 grams and I moved on. It's small things like that I think really we get tied up on. Whereas if you're just focusing on, is the chili healthy? Are you like monitoring how much sour cream and cheese that you're putting in it? Then 9 out of 10 times you're probably just going to be good, and it's a hearty, high fiber, high protein meal.
Right. That's like one of my favorite meals to suggest because it's perfect. It's like you've got your protein, you've got fiber, you've got veggies in there. It's yeah, perfect.
My wife makes a phenomenal one, and she makes it like almost like Kevin in The Office, where it's like the big oil drum of chili. And she's much more graceful than Kevin, who spills it
Good.
all
That's
over.
good.
But we freeze it in our basement, and then it's just like a really good, because my oldest daughter does dance, my youngest daughter does gymnastics, my wife coaches field hockey, and I run a business after school. We don't have time, so I think just having like quick go to like freezer friendly meals really do a good number of like covering your bases on busy nights. What are some other like good blood sugar friendly meals that people should probably have as staples or pantry items when they're going?
Yeah, the chili's a great one. I will say I'm trying to think of some of like the better scores that I've seen. I mean, a lot of times your protein and veggies. I will say one thing that I think is underestimated is a lot of people, and I see this from surgery center recommendations too, like skimping on fat. So a lot of times like fat is going to be one of those macronutrients that really helps buffer your blood sugar and some of those impact from other macronutrients. So I'm all for full fat everything. And I
Yes.
notice a lot of people like psychologically, I feel like it tastes better, like it's got better mouth feel, you feel more satisfied versus like I mean fat-free
Try fat
cheese.
free cheese and
It's
then
one of the
try
saddest
like
things ever
full fat
invented.
cheese. I will say, like, depending on if I have to do a photo shoot or stuff, it's like where I have to be like very capricious. I go to the fat-free options, and it's like I taste it and I'm like, yeah, I know exactly what I'm doing to myself every single time.
Hmm.
And just so like we clear the air on that, why is fat so important? Especially covered like perimenopausal and with blood sugar and all that good stuff. Why should we not be eliminating a major macronutrient?
Yeah. Well, hormone balance, it's huge for, including blood sugar. So it does help regulate that. But I mean, if you think of like your brain, for example, is, I can't remember exactly, it's like two-thirds fat. And you think if you're not getting a lot of that, but I think being picky about what fats you choose, like, avocados, oil, like being picky about some of those, like avocado oil, olive oil, nuts, seeds, things like that, versus, some of the more maybe other highly processed things. So I think fats on their own can be pro-inflammatory or they can be anti-inflammatory. So I think just being picky about some of those things too. But it's very satiating too. So like next to protein, if you get protein and fat together, like that's one of the most satisfying things that you can do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I remember, like, just to show how far the diet industry's gone between low fat and like when fat came like roaring back is when olive oil was considered like the greatest thing ever. And to just show like how bad it was at one point, I was probably definitely over 300 pounds and I knew olive oil was important. So it's like I would do a shot of olive oil before eating. And when I look back, that was like one of the dumbest things ever. I mean, yeah, the fats are good and all, but like I probably could have just put it in my meal properly and not had to worry about it.
Yeah. Well, and it's a good vehicle, I think, too. Like if you throw like some butter on your broccoli, like how much better does that taste? I feel like bringing, veggies and some of those maybe more boring foods, I guess, to life a little bit can really help.
Corn on butter is by far one of the greatest, gifts that God gave us with everything. So I absolutely agree with that. Going back to blood sugar and with like fruits and vegetables, everyone seems to freak out over like apples, bananas, and fruit after weight loss surgery, especially when they're like, well, it's got a lot of sugar content. Can you kind of go over like why we should be mindful of it or why we should probably say like in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't really matter? Can you just like clear the air for apples and bananas in your opinion?
Yeah. I will say it's one of those things. So when I have a client that wears a continuous glucose monitor, like, fruit is one of those things that some people tolerate it really well, and some people are more sensitive to it, so then we're mindful of portions. Because I think that's the first thing is when you think about watermelon or grapes, who eats, a half a cup of watermelon? You can really pound that down, and it's like, "Give me the spoon and half the melon, and game on." So I
I
think the
will say
portions.
I
Yeah.
am almost worried like when those days come for me because that's kind of my summer cheat hack of if I'm really trying to keep a little bit leaner and I want to add volume without really throwing anything off. I just like pretty much have a watermelon cut every Sunday so we can chuck the rinds for garbage day and then we just keep like a bucket in the fridge and we go the Dominions go through like a watermelon a week, I want to
Mhm.
say, from Memorial Day to Labor Day.
Mhm. And I think too, like, even, like, pairing that up with something, kind of going back to blood sugar balance, but I will say too, fruit, you do get some of that fiber, which helps buffer it. So compared to, like, say, fruit juice, for example. So, like, an apple's gonna be a world of difference better on your blood sugar versus, like, apple juice, which is super concentrated. Oftentimes, it's got extra sugar added to it, so you do get that benefit of, like, the extra fiber, but I would say for some people, again, like some people will see spikes from like even berries. So pairing that up with something and just being mindful about like again like protein and fat and then thinking about those like fruits as your fiber component of the meal maybe.
So if someone wants to do like a snack and incorporate like an apple a day, what are some easy things to pair with that after bariatric surgery?
Yeah, so peanut butter, I feel like peanut butter is a great one. I've seen a lot of people do even like Greek yogurt, like almost doing a fruit dip. So,
Hmm.
like, Greek yogurt, like, vanilla. I've seen this, like, apple nachos where people will do, like, the peanut butter drizzle with, like, maybe some dark chocolate chips or nuts or something on them too. How else have I seen it? I have a bunch I wanted to, like, throw them in the air fryer, like, kind of do, like, sautéed apple or something,
I've
um,
never thought to air
warm.
fry an apple.
What was that?
I've never thought to air fry. So wait, what do? You just put them in there?
I haven't tried it yet. So this is like I want to try it. So it's almost like apple pie then, right? Just cut them up, slice them up, saute them or throw them in the air
Don't
fryer.
tempt me with a good time.
Yeah. So again, and then you could use that as like a, topping for like Greek yogurt or something with some nuts. So
No, it's a
kind of,
very nice option for that.
yeah. Yeah.
When we talk about like cravings and blood sugar dips and spikes and all that good stuff, why do people kind of crave sugar, and is it reflective to blood sugar after bariatric surgery?
I do see it a lot. So that those two are connected. So like cravings and fluctuation. So basically when I see the trend of like a really big blood sugar spike, so some examples, maybe some sneaky ones, like I see sugary coffees a lot. That's one that can just like send your blood sugar soaring, especially that we're getting into this warmer season, like, pumpkin spice latte and peppermint mochas and things like that. So that's a really sneaky one. But what happens is your blood sugar jumps really high, really fast. And then you come basically crashing back to earth. And, thankfully we have a liver that will like kick out some sugar for us. But sometimes your brain doesn't always pick up on that. So we're actually seeing like some more research where how fast your blood sugar crashes. So how hard and how fast you crash is a bigger predictor of how many calories you eat in the following couple hours and even like into the following day. So really preventing those big steep spikes and crashes can help manage hunger a lot better.
And when it comes to like hunger management as well, like obviously there's different stages in like the whole bariatric process. Like what are some key like things we should be looking for when it comes to blood sugar in the first year as opposed to like someone like me who's 4 years out and is kind of like just living and existing?
Yes. The number one thing that I look for, and I think for like blood sugar management, but then also thinking about like weight regain is grazing. So that's one of like the number one offenders where the more frequently you eat, I should say it's not like we don't want your blood sugar to be a flat line. Like that's just not realistic. Like it's normal to have a gentle kind of like rise. Like think about like rolling hills versus mountain peaks. But what happens is when you're grazing, so kind of snacking throughout the day, it's like up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down. And you're kind of like catching your own tail all day because you're just eating these little amounts. So I think that that's a big one that I look at in terms of like some of that variability. So that might look like having a little bit more volume at once, like having, good amounts of protein, fat, and fiber. I feel like just so you leave the meal satisfied, because I feel like maybe it's, diet culture for so long. We think we need to restrict or feel hungry to see progress. And it's like you can feel satisfied and still see the scale go down.
I think that's one of the things that's helped me with both working with registered dietitians and good coaches is obviously as you get closer to certain goals or things, you're going to have a little bit of discomfort when it comes to hunger. But a lot of like the initial work can really be just managed by having like a full plate that's balanced and portioned out. And it's why I think like registered dietitians have such an important job is you're going up against like a multi-million-dollar industry without getting too tinfoil hatty on. But there's a lot of money in selling either sexy supplements or like eliminating or doubling down on a food group. And I always feel like the coaches and the registered dietitians that I align with are the more ones who are like, well, if you just balance out your portfolio of proteins, carbs, and fats in the right portions, you can really have what you want when you want in an amount that makes sense.
Hmm. And
Right?
I think bariatric patients are maybe more vulnerable to some of that marketing too, because just because something is high protein doesn't mean maybe it's better than, something else. So I think that that you see a lot of like the marketing of some of those things. Or, you even think of like we've got protein chips and we've got protein crackers. And I mean, half the time they come crumbled already. It's like that's gonna go right through you.
Depressing. Yeah, depressing alone.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I feel like you look at things, I don't want to give names out, but there is a very specific cookie that's packaged and marketed as a protein cookie. And I was like, oh, let me take a look at this. And this is like an example of prior to bariatric surgery, I really didn't care about nutrition labels. Like if it said low fat, I just assumed this is good for me. Like I was the kid who would eat like a box of snack roll cookies because it was low fat and be like, oh, I'm totally doing a healthy choice. It's like you ate a box of cookies. Like no. And then you see like now they have protein cookies and you look at it and it's like 8 grams of protein. I kind of wish more people understood nutrition labels, if only because I think we pay twice as much for that bag of protein chips or protein cookie. Whereas if I just ate like maybe 4 more ounces of ground beef, I'd hit the protein content and then I could just have a cookie that tastes good and enjoy it more than like the $7 bag of chips that is fine, but like Doritos are a nickel and taste a lot better. And if you just portion it, like you can kind of do a lot more with
Right. Exactly. And I think the front of like just even ignoring the front of package and going straight to the back is, a really big eye opener too. Like I can't remember what I was comparing. Maybe it was Triscuits. It was regular Triscuits and reduced fat. And I looked at them and I'm like, it's like 1 gram of fat difference.
it's really not worth it.
It's
There's a
right.
lot of those things where I pull up both and I'm just like, well, this is a crock. I'm not wasting my time on this. Like,
Hmm.
especially like I know I always get tied up of, well, why do you track macros? I'm like, for me personally, and I know it's not for everyone, but for me personally, it's macros helps me maintain my weight loss the same way that my budget, like managing my budget, has kept me and got me out of $250,000 of debt. It's this whole idea of like, well, I know how much I can spend, I know what my allotment is, and it kind of works well with that. But it also gives me the freedom to spend when I want to, like, oh, I do have the money for this, or oh, I can get this to work into my macros, which is why, like, most of the time when I'm in maintenance or even muscle building, I can work like a Costco chicken bake every Friday night into my routine. I know this is like the most boringest deal ever, but like the Costco chicken bake is like the most glorious way that I can like enjoy a Friday night for $3.99 and kind of make it all work.
For the cost of like one bag of Quest chips, you've got like a whole meal.
Yeah. Yeah. And like the better part is 55 grams of protein.
Yeah. Nice.
I should say Costco does not sponsor me or Kayla on
Yeah.
either of these, but if Kayla did get a sponsorship, I'd absolutely hop on that in a second.
Yes.
But looking at it like back to blood sugar, and I know it's like we get into all the fun stuff and then we come back. When we're like dining out after bariatric surgery, like what are some tricks to kind of make sure we're keeping our blood sugar in check? How are we making sure we're being mindful about our plates? What's the best advice you can give when it comes?
Yeah, so like specifically eating out, I would say most often you can find like, a cut of meat, some veggies, a lot of like bunless options. I feel like we're seeing like a nicer shift in that area. You see like Jimmy John's has the unwitches and some of those lower carb options can be helpful for blood sugar. Again, like if you're eating out, like enjoy yourself, like you said kind of about the budget. It's like, I 80-20 rule. Like if you're nailing it 80% of the time, like 20%, you can have those things that are quote unquote like off limits. Or, even having like something like dessert, but saving that for last can be something to help kind of mitigate some of those blood sugar spikes too. I will say too, like thinking about like when you eat out and they bring like the bread or the chips or things like that, like if that's going to be really tempting. I know I've had some people, it's like that's part of the experience, but then sometimes it's like maybe you just want to avoid the temptation altogether because when that hits the table, it's going to be gone. So I think in those situations too, like when you're kind of front loading your meal with a bunch of carbohydrate, that can really have a steep impact. But I think again, like part of what I like doing with clients is like figuring out what's worth it. Like what are those worth it foods and experiences? Because food is so much more than just, macros
Macro.
and blood sugar. It's like it's connection with other people and really kind of balancing all that too.
It really is. And I think like it's different strokes for different folks when it comes to everything. I work with some clients who they're on the road like 5, 6 days a week. And it's like, yeah, you are going to have to dine out. Like it just at that point it comes with the territory. You should be handling it differently than, like when the Dominios go out for dining options, it's usually like because of all my kids' palates, it's like the equivalent of an Applebee's. And not that there's anything wrong with that, but I kind of sit there and I'm like, I don't know if I need to like burn it all for this. But when we do get a fine dinner out, it's like, no, I'm eating the bread. It's good bread. It's still warm. Like, and I cover that sucker in like butter. And it's like, yeah, I go out like that maybe 4 times a year. So
Right. And you're cushioning your carbs. You got to slather the butter on and you get a good fat source.
I finally have justification of like, no, I need
Yes.
to. That's when I also like in most Italian restaurants, they give you like the olive oil with the crushed red pepper flake. It's like, oh, now I'm finally cushioning these carbs. Like Kayla can be so proud of me as I
Yeah, you
like
don't have
down
to
a
shoot
whole
your
pile
olive
of
oil
carbs.
anymore.
I know, I don't shoot it. I cover that. I use the Italian elbow when I pour it too. Like it goes the full circle around
Yeah.
to get everything. So back to blood sugar, we're going to come with this idea of alcohol after weight loss surgery and blood sugar. I feel like this is a powder keg that no one really understands or manages, especially when it comes to like the difference between VSG and RNY. Can you just like go off on everything we should know about like alcohol after weight loss surgery and return to blood sugar?
Yes. Well, maybe I'll start with just like transfer addiction. So I know transfer addiction's real. And I think like the most recent stat I saw was like almost 1 in 5 after a bariatric surgery. So you have limited capacity to cope with food, alcohol can be something that can become a crutch really easy. So just kind of warning on that right away. Because I think I'm
Absolutely.
surprised at actually how many people aren't aware of it.
I'm surprised the number's only 1 in 5 when it comes to transfer addiction. I think the more that I meet people out in public, and I'm like, myself included, like I will be the first to admit that like I've had times where I have struggled with, um, dealing with alcohol as well as retail therapy and other vices,
Hmm.
just because it's tough to hit. But with alcohol, how can it affect our blood sugar, and what do we kind of need to know if we are going to incorporate alcohol after weight loss surgery?
Yeah, I would say being mindful of like some of the sugary some sugary mixers. So, because surprisingly, alcohol, like if you remove kind of some of those additives, like say a margarita, for example, there tends to be a lot of sugar that I see a lot of spikes with, but alcohol alone. So I've seen some pretty big variances. Like if you're doing no sugary mixers, alcohol can actually tank your blood sugar. That's why we get the snackies, when you have a
Really?
few drinks, and that's why you want chips and pizza and something carby. Oftentimes it's because it can tank your blood sugar. Yeah.
Really?
It doesn't mean this isn't a promotion to go out and
No,
drink
I know that,
alcohol.
but I've been drinking for quite a long time, and this is the first I've ever found out the science behind it.
Yes. So I would say again, like sugary mixers aside, it can tank your blood sugar. That's why we get the snackies. So having just healthy snacks on hand can be really helpful. But I think too, looking at the bigger scope of blood sugar and kind of going back to sleep, we think that alcohol, like, you pass out or, you got to take the edge off and then you fall asleep faster. But it's like, it really tanks your sleep quality and that can indirectly impact your blood sugar as well. So just recognizing that if you do choose to have a drink or three, that's probably going to tank some of that good quality sleep, and just recognizing that that can pour into the next day. So you're probably going to be more snacky even into the next day too. So being mindful about like really prioritizing protein, like healthy fats, and being especially mindful about, yes, those impacts and the variability.
I just love that you went to a drink or three as opposed to a drink or two, because I'm
Yeah.
more of an in for a penny, in for a pound sort of dude, where it's like, I respect my wife, but she is very good. Like, she will have half a beer and put it back in the fridge. I'm like, that's going to be disgusting the next. I know. That's the face I've had to learn to mask for over a decade now. But my wife is also that good person. Like, she can have half a glass of wine with dinner and be like, fine. I'm like, well, if I'm having half a glass of wine, I might as well have like 4 or 5 and catch the buzz off that sucker. So
Make it worth it, right?
exactly. And it's at this point in both my bariatric journey, in my nutrition, and in my lifestyle, I really don't drink like I did in my 30s, and I absolutely don't drink like I did in my 20s. And I just look at all the wasted calories I probably spent, but a whole lot of good times as I went through. But
Hmm.
when we go back to everything, we're getting close to the end, and I also want to go through our bonus questions and all the other fun stuff. What's something we didn't cover today that you wish more people knew about their blood sugar after bariatric surgery?
Oh, that's a good one. I think when you learn how to balance, like you'd be surprised. I've had some clients even say how when they really started to make that a focus, they felt like they had less food noise. So, like almost the equivalent of a medication. You get some of that mental energy back. It's different, I think. So, it's definitely a different way to look at things or track things. using something like a CGM can be really helpful. There's a lot of aftermarket options now. So actually just as of summer of 2024, you can get a glucose monitor for as little as $50. And that can give you 2 weeks of really great data. And it's not something you have to do forever, but it's just really enlightening because I think it can be also very validating when you say if you have crazy, blood sugar symptoms or cravings or something that you're really trying to dive into and you get feedback that is like, well, that's why when I do XYZ, I feel ABC. You can really start to make connections outside of things like calories. And I think that that's kind of mentally very different when we're just used to counting things all the time.
And I agree. I think there's something where like, macros and calories do play a certain role, but I also think like looking at the data of how do we look, how do we feel, and I really like that you said it doesn't have to be like a lifetime thing. I think especially like if you've gotten to a healthy weight where you feel good, you move good, you sleep well, I always say that's the best sign of like you don't need to count macros, calories, or do anything at this point. If you're happy with that whole relationship, good. You should be transitioning off. But I think with like a CGM as well, if you notice something starts to feel off, going back to the well every now and then just to see what the data is showing gives you a much more clear look of like, oh, it could be this, and that might be something we want to take a look at.
Exactly. It's data.
Yep. All right. So now we're going to go to the rapid fire and then the fun stuff afterwards. So all my clients, I coach on the busy method, and each letter stands for something. And then we actually put an exclamation point at the end because why not? So the B stands for building habits. What do you think the best habit people could build after bariatric surgery would be, in your opinion?
I would say movement. As much as the dietitian in me wants to say nutrition, I think the more I'm learning about just like, having like healthy muscles, that is really going to be a game changer, I think, in terms of how you feel, but then just how you process things. So, yes, I would
I
say
think I want to
movement.
keep like a back order of how many dietitians give an answer of movement and how many personal trainers give an answer of diet. Because I'll be the first to say, I actually, as a personal trainer, I think the diet's the bigger needle mover, but I love the fact of long term sustainable movement is critical. So great. All right, we're on to you. Understanding nutrition. What's one thing you wish everyone knew about nutrition after bariatric surgery? And don't cop out and say protein. Everyone says protein.
Yeah, I know that's like the instinct that I wanted to go to, but I do have a fun fact about protein maybe that would
Let's
maybe.
throw in fun fact of protein. I love how it always, well, we're going to bring it right back to protein.
Yeah, you can't. So, unlike fat and carbohydrates, like you can't store protein. So, that's why you need annoying amounts of protein all the time. So, I feel like we just don't have that reserve except for our muscles. But that's the last thing we want to do is like tap into your muscle reserve for things like that. So,
Early, often, and on the go. So now you have to give me a non protein related understanding of
a
nutrition.
non
I'm not
protein.
letting you out of that.
Yeah. I think we really don't appreciate fiber enough. Like I think we think about like fiber as like, oh, yeah, you eat high protein. If you want to poop, you got to have fiber. But I think just in the scope of gut health too. And some of the research that we see is bariatric surgery is basically like a reset in a good way for your gut health. So I think really leveraging things like fiber as you tolerate it, because it can definitely be a little bit, touch and go at first. But I think that that can be a really big game changer too when we look at things like gut health and just really optimizing like after surgery, and you have a clean slate that you get to start fresh with.
I think that, and just to go back to the mindset of all that, I think that's really important. We talk a lot with clients and people who I meet in the community of just you really do have a clean slate after this surgery and how you identify what foods you choose to incorporate, what your relationship with movement is. You kind of get this awesome chance to reset. And the more I think that you see people lean into that of this is like this fresh start and I'm going to reinvent myself and what I identify as, the better the results are in the long.
Mhm. Absolutely.
Yep. All right, S, staying active. Best tip to stay active.
I think the biggest thing is starting small because we always have this like in order for it to count, I have to
I
do an
need to
hour
run a
workout in the
marathon and
gym.
like bench press a car like 2 days.
Yeah, or even like I see so many people like strip the joy out of movement when they put maybe like underlying expectations, like, okay, I'm gonna go outside and go for a walk. That'll be awesome, but I have to do 2 miles in order for it to like be enough. So I think like just starting small, because it always feels better to do more than what you anticipated. And I know how painful that can be to think like, okay, I'll walk around the block, or I'll walk for 5 or 10 minutes, not 90, and just kind of loosening up some of those expectations.
I think just playing the long game of you have this surgery, and the beauty of the surgery is for many of us, it allows us to live a longer life. So it means you have more time automatically on the table. And I think it's not to say it's one of the bigger mistakes. No, I will. One of the bigger mistakes I think people make is they feel like by the end of their 1 year, if they can't squat like 500 pounds and they can't run like the Boston Marathon and they haven't earned 8 billion splat points in their orange burn blast camp, that they're an abject failure when it comes to movement. And in reality, I can name probably a dozen bariatric patients who have major followings who have gotten amazing results just by like hitting a step goal, and not like hitting 15,000 steps the day after surgery. Like, I'm going to start at 3,000 steps because that's where my average is. And then for the month of November, I'm going to go to 3,500. And then for the month of December, go to 4,000. And then slowly and surely work up to not even a crazy number, like 7 to 8K. And just being like, this is what I do and this is how I identify, does an amazing job.
Yeah, and especially for like folks working remotely, it's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard to get like 2,000 steps a day sometimes if you're, or a day like, lots of calls and Zoom meetings. And yeah, it can be a lot.
It's funny. Everyone's like, oh, you're a teacher in the summertime. You must get so many more steps. And it's like, actually, I don't, because I'm so business focused at that point of making sure like I do a lot of the heavy lifts for Busy Bariatrics for the whole year in the summer. And there'll be days where like I get to like 6 o'clock, like right before I get on the client calls, and I'm like, oh God, I'm like at 3,000 steps. So it really is like, depends on where you are in your day and how everything works. All right, why we're going to pivot a little bit off of clients, but I'm going to go personally to you. What's the best way you show up for yourself every day?
I would say it comes back to movement. I would say one thing that my husband and I do, like every morning we get out and walk 2 miles, and that's just like our time. It's
Beautiful.
uninterrupted. And I really look forward to that. We had a week where it was kind of touch and go. We didn't get to do it as much. And it's like something feels off. I'm cranky. I'm not getting my steps in. So I think just like having that built into your day and not having it be a question of whether or not you're going to do it. It's like, okay, what time are we going to get this in? It's not a if, it's like when are we going to do it? So that's one big thing.
It's funny. They've done a lot of studies that when people walk and talk, it reduces the conflict level of the conversation, and that couples who actually walk together, because it's not a direct confrontational look when they're discussing things, it's that they're both putting the vision in the same direction. There is something that happens psychologically that allows you to agree more. Which is why I think like one of the best things me and Kate do is we'll go on walking dates. Like it's also because we're on such a budget. It's like we can afford this. It's outdoors, and our kids can manage themselves for the most part. But it really is just like a very healthy relationship building thing. I find I'll do my one-on-ones with my assistant and my assistant coaches. I will do walking because it allows me to breathe a little bit better. So it's a great thing to do.
Hmm.
Final one, exclamation point. Favorite healthy source of dopamine?
Ooh, sunshine.
Such a good one.
Yeah, I would say sunshine, especially kind of thinking about heading into winter. It kind of makes me a little anxious thinking about when am I going to get my D and my dopamine?
It really is like the most important thing to catch on that. And then I always forget, I know Minnesota, right?
Yeah,
Currently living, that's where you grew up.
both.
Still there, both.
I even wore my best flannel for you today.
Oh my
Yeah.
goodness. Oh my goodness. And in true New Jerseyan fashion, I'm on my best behavior. I don't think I've cursed yet in this
Yeah.
episode. So
It's a
definitely,
clean version.
it's the
Yes.
clean version. You've got the good flannel, and I've kept the swear jar empty for like the first
Yes,
time.
good.
I can't believe I've gone 50 minutes and I haven't like dropped an F-bomb yet. So
Mhm.
I guess I get like a gold star, or I just get to record another episode next week.
Yeah.
So one way or the other we get. All right, we got through the busy stuff. Now let's get to like the fun stuff of Why did you open your own practice of coaching as a registered dietitian?
Yeah, it was twofold, I'll say. I think working in a clinic, I kind of like to do my own thing. I don't like to be bound by protocols, especially when you're like, we're not doing the most efficient or giving out the best advice. Like handing out to my, again, like bariatric folks, here's the 16 things to do, blah, 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 blah. And half the time it's like, this is not applicable for this person. So I think I just really didn't like how it was a one size fits all approach. So I feel like being on my own can really do my best to actually coach instead of just be a robot. And then that accountability, I think, is just key for a lot of people too. So just like having some accountability. And I think just working with a lot of the women I work with, I think just to normalize a lot of what they're going through, because I think, growing up, I watched a lot of family members diet. I struggled with emotional eating. So I feel like I get that mental tug of war. And I think just helping like free, men and women, I think from that is very helpful. And like you said, we're kind of up against like millions of dollars of, marketing and this and that, and kind of teasing out like that nutrition noise and really helping people find stuff that works for them.
I think that's like probably one of the toughest things is that we don't say it enough, but I think for a lot of us growing up in households of a certain age and generation, we are almost like slammed with nutritional information back then. My mom will be the first to say, and she's like an amazing mom. I never want anyone to like hear me talk about this. Like, she did everything the best she could. I had a very happy, healthy family. My mom and dad loved each other and they were very good to us. There was not as much nutritional guidance out there when it came to stuff. So like I remember like with bariatric surgery, my mom was like, "This has to come from like I raised you and wanted you to have seconds of being clean plate club." I'm like, I don't know. They like I'm pretty sure every household said like some poor starving kid in Africa was going to die if I didn't eat like the rest of my peanut butter and jelly, which made no sense logically. But like it's not the only thing. So I don't know what the point of that part of the story was other than to say I love my mom and that I think it's very common that we see that sort of.
Yeah, and I think too, like when we look back, it's like she was probably growing up in the low fat, fat free everything. I mean, we were kind of like touted that for how many decades. And then I think, she was doing everything that she could and just maybe wasn't armed with the best information sometimes.
I will say that too is then you had like my grandmother who she is 93 right now and she still will have like half a glass of wine, one ravioli, half a meatball, which is like a depressing amount, but she also now will remind everyone that she's older than her weight. Like it's kind of comical because it's like, well, you're kind of perfect portioned, and I guess the protein to carb and fat ratio on that plate as well. But it's kind of funny when you look at like all those sort of things. So you're not the first dietitian to kind of mention that, like, it's tough because you would see so many patients or it was almost robotic. Just so that people get a better idea, how many, because this is where I do think the bariatric community needs to understand that like you'll hear a lot my surgical center only gave me this or I only met with my registered dietitian for 5 minutes every 3 months. Can you just kind of explain how most big box hospitals operate, because I don't think people understand that the dietitians that I've always met love and care, it's that they are slammed on everything that's going on.
Yeah, and I think it's with dietitians and other like, health professionals too. I think I was seeing, I think at one point up to 12 people a day, back to back to back to back. And then that doesn't even include time for charting. And so to streamline things, a lot of times it's like we had templates. So it's like you're not really hearing to like you're not really listening. I'm going through my mental checklist going, okay,
I have
what
to
are
make
their
sure these
portion
boxes
sizes?
are
We're 3 months post-op. They should be in this range when, really it's different. Or, how many ounces of water are you drinking? So I feel like they probably mean well. If you are seeing someone or going in, they're just, thinking about how they're documenting it so your insurance can cover it too. So I think that's a big portion is like hitting off some of those parameters. So they're not trying to be mean, but trying to, again, oblige the insurance companies too. If you had to do something like support group or lose X amount of weight beforehand. So I saw that trip a lot of people up to like having to lose 10 pounds before surgery. And it's like, hey, that's why I'm here, is because I can't lose weight.
exactly. I
Hmm.
always think that's the weirdest thing for some surgical centers, and I know it's more of like the insurance thing of like they have to lose weight before. Like it was a weird thing. I had to show a repeated pattern of failed weight loss, which is kind of embarrassing. Like, I have to go back to my primary care physician and be like, hey, do you have in my chart all the things you've tried to ask me to do? And as a matter of fact, I do. And it's like, then he has to print out and give you that letter. And you look at him like, well, this is depressing. Like, for the last 15 years, I haven't been able to lose. And then they're like, okay, you're cleared for bariatric surgery. You have to show you have to lose 20 pounds between now and your surgery date. And it's like, well, no, I just showed you a whole list of here's all the times I couldn't do this. What makes this time different? So it's weird how that all works. What's one of the greatest joys you have of like now that you like do your own thing?
I think the greatest joys is my clients are streamlined like right to my phone. And so I can check on them. They can hone in with me or like kind of check in with me. And I think just like getting those messages, like, whether it's like a discovery with like CGM or I hit a new low. So I think like just those little things can be so encouraging. And I feel like there's nothing too small to celebrate.
I think it's awesome. And I think one of the cool things from talking to you is knowing how much of a relationship you build with your clients and really you get to know them. And I think that's probably the trick to really getting results or like being successful, whether you're a dietitian or a personal trainer or working in the bariatric community. The more you build your relationship with your clients, the better the results come in because they know you're there to help them and trust them. And I know you do that every day, and taking the time that you do to even do this just shows how much you care. So I wanted to thank you again for coming on. This is the part where we shamelessly plug for like 2 minutes and 20 seconds. So what do you want to put out there?
Yeah, what do I wanna put out there? I would say I did do some kind of a little tweaking on my CGM program, so just kind of thinking, like, the state of the nation, like, where we're at now in terms of, like, groceries are going up and things like that, so I have made, like, some shorter term options too, so I have openings right now for a 4-month and 6-month CGM program, and sometimes that might sound like a lot, but we have a lot of stuff to go through, so, yeah.
You know, it's funny because when I start initially with a 3 month membership to work with me, and I very rarely have a client not stay longer, just because like there really is a lot of like we have to develop rapport, we have to kind of figure out the patterns, we have, like there's so much that goes into it. But having options for other clients where it's like, look, if you're really ambitious and you work your tail off, I've had some clients who are like, look, I'm going to crush these 3 months and I'm going to stay at a lower tier, if only because I like everything we're doing, but I want to get the most bang for my buck is critical. So I love that you listen to that and you incorporate that.
Yeah,
So
and I think long term too. So it's like I think I've had, people I've been working with for a couple years now. And I was like, happy surgiversary. By the way, it's our anniversary too. We've been working together this long. So I think that, you're always really motivated initially, but I think really once some of that like maybe motivation, wears away a little bit, it's nice to have that accountability buddy or, I'm always like proactively reaching out if somebody's quiet. I'm like, what's going on? Like, I haven't heard from you. That usually means things aren't good. We always want to share things when, things are all honky dory, but when, yeah.
I don't know if it's from my years of teaching special ed during the day and then coming in for at night, but I actually go back and check through the clients I haven't heard from, and I call it shepherding, where I kind of put them to the front of the queue of just like a hey, what's going on? How have you been? I never asked like you've been eerily quiet, but it's essentially you've been eerily quiet, like what's up? And I think it's cool to see like different reasons and seasons come up. Like I have some clients who work in government, and right now, as of this recording, we're like close to November, and with the election coming up, it's like, yeah, I ghosted because I am like working 18-hour days. Like, okay, here's some nutrition to do, here's some body weight stuff. Let's scale back based on where we're at and make it more efficient. So love hearing all that. All right, Kayla, we could probably do this for like 8 more episodes, and who's to say we aren't going to? But at this point, I'm going to sign us all off. So if you've liked this episode, I am going to ask, please leave a 5-star rating and review over on whatever podcast player that you listen to, and you'll be eligible for a weekly drawing for a free product from one of my sponsors. If you don't think I earned a 5-star rating review, I guess just like give me whatever I earned after that. But as you can clearly see, I don't know how to end these episodes yet, so I will leave it with the moniker I always do, which is keep getting busy. Have a great rest of your day, and see you soon.